Welcome back to the Motion Mentors podcast. I'm Jimmy Davidson, and here we are trying to grow and elevate the parkour industry. Today's guest is Brandon Douglas. Brandon has had an extensive history growing his own parkour businesses in both the clothing and podcasting verticals, as well as has helped many different parkour gyms on the design side, the management side, the coaching side, and lots of great stuff in between. Today, we dive in pretty deep into his experience, what has worked, what didn't work, and just his outlook for the parkour industry moving forward. So I think if you are an entrepreneur or aspire to be in the parkour space, this will be a really great one for you. And if it is, we definitely hope that you give it a share. The more that you share, the more that you talk about this as far as how it helped you or how you think it can help someone else, the bigger that this platform can grow. And that is directly tied to us helping other entrepreneurs and then achieving our mission of growing the parkour industry. So if you like this, if you get value from that, please give it a share. All right, without any further ado, Brandon Douglas. All right, and welcome back to the Motion Mentors podcast. Today we have on Brandon Douglas, who has quite an extensive parkour career. He has a podcast that's evolving, from one thing to another, which he can tell us about. He's a SPL champion, and Brandon, welcome to the podcast here.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also am on this podcast. This is Christopher Hollingsworth, and joining us as well is Jimmy Davidson, and we're representing Motion Mentors. So excited to have Brandon here in California with us.
So Brandon, you came out to have us on your podcast, and that was a lot of fun, by the way. Super cool going into what we do and our trajectory as entrepreneurs. And I've seen a number of your podcasts and you interviewing, frankly, a lot of parkour entrepreneurs that are already in the field. And I definitely see you as a parkour entrepreneur who has already been collecting stories, collecting wisdom. We have a cat on the podcast too. And you shared with me that you are actually in the middle of a state of transition from rebranding from Height Drop to the B.A.D podcast.
B.A.D podcast.
B.A.D podcast.
It's not even the B.A.D podcast. It's actually the B.A.D show. The B.A.D show, which is just my initials, Brandon Andrew Douglas.
Brandon Andrew Douglas, the B.A.D show.
The B.A.D show. Terrible show.
No, the acronym, it's bad.
Yeah.
It's good, and it's bad.
Give me a little bit about, up until now, what has your journey through parkour been? And then how did that begin as, because we have MYRM that we haven't mentioned it either, and I'll let you tell the story there. Give me your parkour entrepreneurial history up to this current moment.
Oh, all right. Thank you for the platform and the opportunity to tell this story in a way. My entrepreneurial ventures, I would say, started pretty early on, in that when I was about a year into training, I actually hadn't even considered doing anything other than just enjoying the training. At that point, I got a meniscus injury where it took me out for about a year. And when I came back to the sport, I had realized that, this can just be taken away from you at any time. The training is not guaranteed, even if you're smart about it. I wasn't doing anything particularly stupid, but there was a lot of unknowns. And so I realized I really wanted to make it count. And that's when I started to get serious about the training and get serious about my trajectory and just what I wanted. I was like, well, what am I here for if it can be taken away at any moment? And so then I decided, all right, well, what do we want to make the most of my training? I want to go as hard as I can, be the best athlete I can possibly be, see how I can contribute to the conversation of movement globally that's happening in parkour right now. And that's when I started to get, so there's a career seed being planted there in terms of an athlete. So that was kind of the first seed I wanted to plant, is how can I become a pro parkour athlete, which still is a very suspect term. But, I wanted to go pro as an athlete at first. And then through various competitions and starting to find some success there in the speed category, particularly for me, I realized that was an avenue that was actually working. But that was also, and that happened very quickly, but also I was very excited about that for a long time. There was about a few years where I was feeling like I was really at the top of my game and I was getting a lot of success in that realm. And at the same time, I was diversifying already because I was like, that is not super stable. So I was also working for Apex Movement and doing the parkour gym facility development coaching thing for a while. And that was from building boxes to then teaching youth classes to then teaching adult classes to then moving into marketing roles and developing the brand and partnering with those guys at the very end of that trail. So then it was two-pronged. And then that still wasn't enough for me. I still wanted to express original ideas and creative thinking, and it was something that wasn't happening in terms of my affiliation with the pro team at Apex. That, you know, there was no traveling happening. There was no room for me to express exactly how I wanted to and edit and move into cinematography the way I was looking at. So then that's when MYRM came along. So that was probably the biggest and most intentionally seeded project in terms of like, I recognized the value that Knox and Dylan and I all had when we were in the same training space together. I just felt the energy. And this is one of the things I learned on my journey in terms of, it's sometimes, you know, they talk about lightning in a bottle. I think there's a lot of unseen and sort of uncontrollable factors that sometimes unite to form success. And there's types of success that you can recreate and replicate. And then there's types that there's no way to really create it artificially, it feels like. And that was one of those cases where it was just the perfect storm. We had good synergy, like the connection, the relationships that I had with Dylan and Knox was really easygoing. And we all saw things similarly enough or created space for each other to build on that we made clothes and made videos. And at that same time, I was seeing my success in competition decline, and just that road was starting to end. So then I wanted to go all in on that.
Can you tell us what MYRM is for anyone who's not familiar with that?
Sure. So Myrmidons is where that term is derived from. And the Myrmidons, or Myrmidon is kind of more officially how it's pronounced, are these Greek ancient warriors who were the sort of mercenaries that were led by Achilles, was their one chosen leader. So they were allegiant to only him. And those guys were kind of basically blades for hire in many ways. They weren't exactly, they were the most skilled warriors of the time, but they weren't necessarily allegiant to any one nation. They were kind of like, they were allegiant to a worthy leader, and Achilles was their worthy leader. And then wherever Achilles wanted to place their focus, that's where they put it. So we just liked the lore of that. We liked the Greek mythos, and we loved the sort of parallels of the shields and the swords. That's where all the logos and stuff came from, was ancient Greek swords and shields. And yeah.
And then what was the actual business?
And the actual business was make clothes, sell the said clothes, and make videos to promote the clothes. And be good at parkour is sort of like the thing that grounded it down, which is very tricky. It's like you have to, in order to sell clothes for long enough, you have to be compelling as an athlete or a personality or both or some other thing. And it's not an easy business, the garment industry. But
and I would say you were even like one of the most successful parkour brands that existed. You can't really go anywhere without seeing, you know, a MYRM shorts or a MYRM shirt. I have them myself, and they're beat up on everyone, you know, so like you definitely made your cultural impact, and people would definitely buy like a whole new round of them if they came out. And yet, despite all of that, despite all of the success that they had, like, you know, you stopped printing, and like it obviously wasn't a very lucrative business, which that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, it was a very interesting journey, and it's still something I mine to this day, just like knowing what happened in those times and how things are playing out now, and what that all, like how that contextualizes the information even from the past and recontextualizes it as because my relationships with Dylan and Knox continue, but the brand MYRM is sort of dead or at least very, very dormant, you know, like, but we were finding, we found a lot of great success, and a lot of that, I think, from where I sat, it was tied to the fact that there's a lightning in a bottle. Like, okay, I just happened to be located near this great facility, and I knew people that got me into that, and also Dylan being who he was, who was sort of pioneering and championing all types of new movement, and one of the best to ever do it, especially in America. So we had basically one of the best athletes. I was motivated enough, and with his mentorship, I was able to become also one of the best athletes, at least in the competition sphere, and then able to contribute, other types of movement in the artistic realms of parkour. So you had like a lot of hype, you could say, like around that. And then we were truly brothers. I think that's really what grounds it down. And I think that's why people resonated with it is that, and I think that the same thing goes for Store, is it has to be an organic relationship if you want it to be sold as inspirational. Like if you want to like have because to me, what you're sort of selling is the dream of living your dream, in those spheres. And that was my dream, was to hang out with my friends, make great content, really push ourselves. And we were having a great time because we're best friends doing it. But if we weren't best friends, then we're just like in it for the money and for I don't know. It's just weird. Like it doesn't work, and it doesn't feel real. And people pick up on that really quick, I think. So you saw people try to replicate teams like this, like super teams where they get all these athletes together, and they were cool. Like even we were on Rogue Squad, and we really were friends, but it was sort of like top down instead of bottom up.
Yeah,
and
it was way too disconnected.
And so, it's, you can't, again, like, I don't know that you can always recreate it. Like there's opportunity there sometimes, but if you kind of come in like, oh, we're going to make the best team, I've never seen it work that way. So, but we were having lots of success. And here's the other thing is, Knox tied that together for Knox wasn't as well known and popular in terms of like his movement, but he still had a lot of influence and he really connected Dylan and I, and like the three of us together is really what it was. Like if it was just two of us, it was still special, but it wasn't like what it was without it. And Knox was a brilliant business partner. Like he could handle the store, and I could trust him to really actually take care of the orders and do it right. Like he has a really high attention to detail, and like he's somebody that I would go into business with today still because of what he brings to the table. Like he is an extremely detail oriented, like to the T type of guy. And like that was something that was instrumental. And I think that is rare. Again, that's not something that you can always find. With Store, they have a bigger pool to choose from, for example, because they have 7 guys. But still, somebody has to be good enough to handle the designing of clothing and like manufacturing and working with probably somebody in China or some other, foreign language, up late at night, having those negotiative conversations, trying to get a prototype made. That like all that stuff is such it's a different level of the game, and it's like we talked about in our podcast, there's a completely different skill set there. It has nothing to do with parkour. And then Dylan just had like insane physical talent. Like he was an absolute virtuoso, like genius, phenom athlete, and so he brought so much to the table there. And so we all had our own things. And I went to school for marketing, or I went to school for advertising, creative advertising, which was in the journalism school. So my degree's in journalism technically, but it's like I studied art direction and copywriting as my university studies. And so then I could design shit and I could edit videos, and I would just liked being creative, and I saw people weren't putting hip hop in videos as much. And I was like, well, this is part of our brand. That's kind of like a siphon almost. It's kind of like, that's a little cultural appropriation maybe, who knows? But like, it was like just something that hadn't been remixed. It's like, parkour was so young that it was so easy to do something original at that time still. And I felt like we could just be original, and that was all it really took. So with all that, I'm going so long-winded on this for you, but we were doubling, we were reinvesting, and I knew a little bit about business, but I didn't know very much. And so, but I knew that like we didn't need to pay ourselves for a while because at first it was like, let's just establish if this even works. And so we basically put everything we put back into it. Everything we got profit wise, we just reinvested to the next line. And we only got about 3 or 4 lines through before we hit some walls. And then eventually, I'm still sitting on hundreds of pairs of MYRM socks that was like where the revenue all ended up, was just like in these MYRM socks that now I just give away because I'm not really interested in selling them. But we had great success until we didn't. And I think it was a blessing in many ways for me, because ultimately I got so much out of that part of my journey. I don't know which parts I was even saying on the mic and which ones we were talking about in the car earlier. So I'm kind of like, did we talk about this? But anyhow, it coming to a close was very difficult at the time, like the MYRM journey, and me feeling like that, like really letting that chapter go. But now I'm like so glad that it got let go, but at that time, because I don't think that it would have been easy. And I definitely don't think I wouldn't have woken up to all my other shortcomings, because at that time, again, the dream that I had, you're selling this dream, but my dream in many ways I would describe as like a Peter Pan syndrome type of dream, where like I wanted to basically escape from any responsibility. And I loved parkour this much that I wanted to just, if I could keep this pipe dream going, and as long as I could keep selling clothes, and then I wouldn't have to grow up, I wouldn't have to get a real job, I wouldn't have to really work hard. But that was always going to come. There was an inevitable wall I was going to hit, because that was the kind of mode I was operating from, was a sort of escapist, juvenile approach to the whole thing.
Okay.
So that was a lot more than you asked for. But
I know, I love that. That gives a great insight into the mindset you had going into it, kind of the connections with your friends that I think is really common in the parkour early entrepreneurial sphere. Is like, here's me and my friends. We have this feeling, we have this lifestyle we want to propagate for ourselves and share with the world and the community. So let's try and do something, and a lot of times clothing is easy to understand. It's let's put our ethos, our dream on a t-shirt, and let's put this athlete behind it. Let's put our Mentos behind it. So I think hearing your journey and how you got there is really valuable for people who might be sitting exactly right there. For those people who maybe they're at the beginning of the journey and you're months and years past your t-shirt specific, the MYRM journey, if they called you up and they're like, Brandon, we want to do our version of that, and here's everything we're standing on, but how can we benefit from your experience running the business? So from you, like, what are your 3 things that worked business wise that you could propagate, but maybe also a few things that are like red flags, steer clear, or just some things that if you don't realize it's time, let me tell you now before it's too late.
Yeah. One thing that worked, I think, and one of my philosophies from the gate was just be original again. Like I mentioned that, like, show people something new. Why is anyone going to care about what you're doing if you're doing something that's derivative of what everyone else is doing? So emulation and mimicry is a really important part of any creative journey. Or if you're going to build stuff and build a brand or build a business, you have to emulate. But at the same time, you should try at least to offer something that is only something you could offer, I think. And for me, that was like a metric of that was, well, you've never seen this before. Like we would always try to do new moves, new things in parkour, new spots in our videos, new something, new music that we're editing to. So I think keep things fresh is a good pillar that I would throw out there. One thing I definitely would avoid is like, let's see, I think it was really good to keep our partnership was just like 3 ways. I actually put up all the money for MYRM in the beginning because I was the only one that had enough money saved at that time to do anything like that. And that was partially built off my own prowess and my own privilege, you could say, of like
How much money did you put up?
Like $2,200.
Okay.
To like buy the first set of, garments and, whatever, put the LLC fee out and whatever, that kind of stuff. But one thing that became like a trip at some points is like, you're always going to, and I think Toby's also, and some of the store guys have spoken to this, you're going to have to know that it's not going to always be fair. Like partnership, well, okay, it can be fair, but it's not always going to feel fair, especially if you're a young person in the middle of things. You're going to run into some ego battles where you feel like you're doing the lion's share, and you might start to like drive a wedge into your relationships with your business partners if you're not careful and you're not communicative and you're not humble and also willing to take on responsibility even when it's not fair. Sometimes I think is a really key feature of what keeps things moving forward. Is everyone's going to shoulder the whole business at certain moments. Like one person's going to feel like it, and they might actually be shouldering way more than is their responsibility. And hopefully it's not for so long that they burn out or that they go, or that you guys break up, because that can easily, again, it creates resentment between people. And that was one of the factors I think that ultimately led to our kind of disintegration was, just us not knowing how to handle our egos as young men and navigating that space like gracefully. I think I actually did a good job. It wasn't the the thing that really mattered, but it was a feature of some of the struggles of that business. So getting really clear on like who's responsible for what, and taking those conversations all the way through so that you're ready for what you're doing and you're not building resentment, or that you're reassessing if you need to. But also the biggest thing, like Julie Angel, actually, I was once complaining to Julie Angel about having to edit the MYRM documentary because I didn't think I was going to have to edit the MYRM documentary. And, you know, it's funny because I felt strongly about it then, but she told me like, you just need to edit that thing. You know, she basically just said like, you know what you need to do is just do it instead of like getting upset that one of your partners isn't doing it, even if he said he would, if you know it needs to happen. Like sometimes you got to take this stuff on. And I didn't realize it at the time, like what an amazing opportunity it was to actually have the gift of being able to take that footage and make it into what I wanted it to be and showcase that. And to this day, like it's one of my most cherished contributions to the community is that film, and being able to do it through my artistic vision. And it was actually a great gift that I had to do it, you know? So being able to turn that stuff around and you know, again, this is just classic victim mindset struggle that you need to reorient around as a business entrepreneur.
So let me give a little bit of context because if you're listening and you're like, okay, me and my friends, we'll figure it out. We're on such the same page that we would for sure never run into that problem, Brandon. One thing that a mentor could be really, really helpful in that specific conversation is how do you set your partnership up equitably? Mm-hmm. And so you said, you know, maybe it was my ego got in the way or whatever. A lot of times it's just a misunderstanding of what is valuable in a business. Because if you're sitting there and you're saying, I'm going to run the Instagram, you know, that's my thing. I'm going to do that and edit videos. But then someone else is taking on, I'm going to do all of production. I'm going to do all of marketing. I'm going to do all of ensuring that we're scalable. You know, I'll do all the back end stuff. At the end of the day, you might both be putting in, you know, 8 hours of work on a day. But one of those job descriptions that I just said is 1,000 times more value building than the other. So a mentor can point out like, hey, I see that you're doing the Instagram or you're designing the 12th shirt when you haven't really even broken out the market on the first shirt that you've designed. Maybe you should stop doing that and let's put you onto other skill sets that your business vitally needs. And if you are a 50-50 partner and there's two of you, which right there, the mentor would probably be like, don't do that. Don't be 50-50 on anything. But let's say you are, you guys also need to be focusing on areas and building skills that you probably don't have that are equally contributive. And I've seen, and this is a trap that I really fell into with my original business partners, was one of us was doing something that we thought was important and the other one was doing something that ended up being the thing that was important. And it was just it just hurt, you know? But a mentor could point that out and show you what you don't know that you don't know earlier, and just help you keep your friendships. You know?
And thankfully for me, our friendships are better than ever in that regard. Like we all made the choice consciously that was the more important thing, you know? And so when push came to shove, it was like, well, I'd rather be your friend than your business partner, you know? And that we all felt that way. And so we're all friends, even if like the business isn't really, you know, what it was. But I also don't and I felt like it was a huge failure, you know, sometimes in my journey, you know, oh my God, I really failed at creating that. But also it was a huge success, you know. It's not everything in your life is meant to be the thing that you do for the rest of your life. And so for me, again, I think spiritually, I needed to awaken to a new level of consciousness. And I was never going to do that if I actually got to live out that dream, because my dream was to not have to do any of that work potentially. And so like, I think this is, you know, who knows if it's meant to be or whatever, but I'm grateful now that I didn't realize certain things with MYRM, because I don't think that would have contributed to the world necessarily better. I think I have a much better thing to offer people now, and I'm a much more well-rounded and empowered and intelligent human being now that I, you know, was kind of forced through it. You know, sometimes like we're getting spanked by life rather than, you know, sometimes it's the stick, not so much the carrot. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
But that's good for you, or was for me.
Cool. So I know a lot of people are interested in I want to have a clothing line for me and my friends. So I want to spend a little bit more time on picking apart what you learned as like a business practice from MYRM, like if you had to do it all over again, or if you could travel back in time and tweak things. So I want to kind of explore your business metrics if you just have them off the top of your head.
Please.
What do you think your margin average was on a piece of clothing?
This was very suspect. I usually priced it out to be whatever it was that it cost us to make. We would do roughly double that for the price, because I think I'd probably done some research at the time, and I just knew that there's no money if you don't do at least double. You have to in terms of like clothing usually. I mean, unless you're doing crazy volume, and we weren't going to do crazy volume. You know, if you get to a certain stage, you can actually give people a better price, which is crazy. But we were very much a boutique shop. And so when you're starting out, depending how you want to start out, our metrics were like, we're going to price things pretty high, or they weren't that expensive, but we were going to at least do double the hard costs of the garments. And we were going to do limited runs. And I think that was always one of my favorite parts about the business, is once we made an order, and if it sold out, that's it. Or the only time we restocked was with the MYRM shorts, which we restocked twice because people really had a appetite for those.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably more than you needed, but
no, that's perfect.
I'd be curious to what your advice would be, because you're actually much more well versed in this in terms of like what the margins you'd recommend.
Yeah. So if half is kind of what you would do if you are kind of on the lower end of the price tier. Mm-hmm. You know, like if you sell something to a wholesale distributor, you sell it to them at half of your cost, but then they sell it to the general audience at double the cost that you sold it to them. So at the end of the day, it's a 75% markup, you know, or a 4x markup. But if you're selling online direct to consumer, you know, you can get away with a little bit less, but then you're also boutique, and there's 3 owners in your business.
Yeah.
And ideally, because you wanted to have a business that you guys would get paid from and all that, the margin is really just evaporated at 50%, because you're a boutique, you're doing all this work yourself, you're not in bulk, and there's owners to pay. So if the 3 of us were doing that all over again, we would really have to look at like, we need 25% fixed costs, 75% margin. And then we would use that 75% for, you know, some of it would be restocking, some of it would be, a tiny piece would be like what's next.
Yeah.
But a lot of it would be exploring the market and content creation so that we can, grow our total addressable market size. Because you guys were relying a lot on, yours and Dylan's athletic celebrity to like get that out. And you did that and you tapped it, and everyone who you knew bought. But then really there was like plenty of extra athletes who didn't know about you guys and who didn't buy. So a sliver of that margin always does go to, what's next? How can we expand it?
Yeah, it was absolutely like, we were underpriced, which is crazy, because we felt, again, like this is such a practical thing we've come up today twice already. It's just, you just don't know really what the value you're doing is until you crunch the numbers. And we didn't fully crunch it out and even ask ourselves the questions like, well, how much do I want to make? Yeah. Like, and how long am I willing to make that amount before I want to make more? And where do I really want to make at the very end of this? Like, where am I really aiming? And that could have really helped inform the trajectory and do those, like, okay, well, here's actually how much we want to make, and here's how much we're going to invest. And
that's spot on. Yeah, if you know what you want to end up with and you work your way backwards, and this is what we say, especially to parkour gym owners, if you want to make a 10% profit, then that 10% is based on your revenue. 10% of revenue is allocated to profit. And so if, as a clothing brand, if you want 10% is profit, well, then you can work that back. How much profit do I need to actually be not burnt out and sustained by this? Okay, that's X $1,000 a month. Well, that times 10, because it's 10%, means we need to be selling this many, tens of thousands of dollars a month. And now you might look at that and go, oh shit, that's a lot of clothes, But if you take your base unit and you just make it more expensive, which, if you're a boutique and there's a huge value and like a character and a real brand behind it, people want to associate with that, and they'll pay that as opposed to going to Walmart and just buying like a Nike shirt off the rack.
Yeah.
So now your $10,000 in sales, which might look like I have to sell 1,000 t-shirts, really becomes I just need to sell, 200 t-shirts, and I have this much of my budget allocated to marketing, which if you do that, now it's a lot more feasible. So you can work it back, but you land on a very defined, like scientific even price. That's totally out of the realm of, well, half margin looks good, let's just do that.
Well, and one thing I think that really makes a difference too with clothing in particular is like, are you really interested in fashion? Are you like that guy? Because I was at the time, and so was Knox. Knox and I were both pretty into what we were wearing, and we liked clothes, and we were just that way about it. And that is partly needed if you actually want to. I mean, I guess what there's a difference is there's merch, and then there's like a branded clothing and like purpose-built clothing. And it's fine to do merch if that's what you want to do, but know if you're the merch person. Because if you're a merch guy, and that's what I became with Height Drop, my stuff is merch now. It's not like I'm designing it and I want it to be good, but I'm not like going in there and being like, this is the exact cut and fit that I want in this tee. I'm choosing somebody else's t-shirt and, stamping my logo on it or whatever. And that is a huge difference, and that's fine, but they're different marketing strategies too. And it requires a different level of detail. But, I think one of the things that really made the shorts pop off. I mean, there were so many, again, we didn't even know how good we were doing it when we were doing it. We were just like, just throwing shit together. We were a lot of dumb luck and some of that, but also because it was inspired, that's why I was working. But like the zipper pockets is like a huge functional upgrade that we were intentional about. That was one thing. We're like, you know what? We really need to like have shit not fall out of our pockets. I don't know if that's why people liked them, but that was one of the reasons like we really liked them. It's like you could zip your shit up. And now I see zipper pockets. I don't get anything without a zipper pocket.
That was way ahead of its time. I always had a cracked phone screen before I got the MYRM shorts because my phone would fly out. And after those zipper pockets, man, my phone never flew out of my pocket again. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was critical. Cotton shirts, like knowing about, it was another thing, just knowing, well, what do we want? We want to make sure it's pre-shrunk. We hate it when our clothes shrink after we get them. You want to get the fit that fits right, and that's like going to stay that way for you.
And it's that level of thinking and care and give a fuck that gives you the platform to charge more on.
Exactly.
And that's not even including that it's also with the whole dream of like being a parkour athlete and parkour community and what that means, So you cobble all those together and now you land on a price range that's like maybe even $100 for like a well-made t-shirt that's like specific,
Yeah, definitely. It's an interesting like branding and like creating a really good brand it requires a lot. I think it absolutely requires a certain level of celebrity, like you said, to start stuff sometimes, or you have to pay for that, or you get lucky and somebody starts wearing Supreme because they think it's cool. And then it becomes this bigger brand, because Supreme started out as like this skate brand, right? And then things have like taken off, and now they're a full fashion icon brand essentially. And some of that I'm sure is intentional. They have a crazy story, but some of it is function, I guess is what I'm saying. Like some of it is like the clothes have to work. They have to make sense. There has to be a reasoning behind it. It doesn't necessarily matter what the reasoning is as long as you're excited about it. Sometimes I think people focus on they're not focused or oriented towards the value that they're creating. They're more focused on themselves and like what they're trying to do, but they're not like, how is this solving a problem? What problem is it solving? Like, who is this benefiting? And when you stay focused on how you're creating value that way, I hope that makes sense. It's not too generalist, but then you'll create value, and then the success follows. And I wanted to mention one last thing before I'll let you ask me another question, which was in terms of pivoting, being on your toes. Like I think one of the greatest moves we ever made was calling our shorts the winter shorts. And of course we called them the winter shorts because they took way longer than we thought they would to manufacture. And so we got them 6 months later than we thought we would. We intended them to be summer shorts, but we got them in October. So we're like, well, what are we going to do? It's like, well, we have all this inventory. lean into it and just call them winter shorts and make a winter shorts challenge and film ourselves doing stuff in the snow with the shorts on. So that's like, that was one of the things I'm like, oh, we definitely did that super well. Like that was like a genius
that really
move
worked.
that I didn't even realize we were making because it was just fun. Like we were just having fun with it. But that is so critical because you're going to run into these roadblocks in no matter what business you're in. And you have to be able to pivot and jujitsu these things and turn them around to work for you.
Yeah, I still remember that campaign, the winter shorts campaign. Yeah, and you had a bunch of, it was perfect because you guys were in Colorado. And so I think when that video came out, you guys were just like hucking flips and jumps into snowbanks, and people could see that. And that became a whole marketing strategy. So that's perfect. Yeah, I love that. And I just think it's fascinating that, you were a group of people who maybe weren't so aware of what it was that you were doing right. You just were doing it and it was working. And now, like retrospectively, you can examine that and be like, oh yeah, here's what really worked about that time. And it's a good lesson for people too, because it shows that like you need to know what you're doing and you need to be good at it. Like you were good at it and you didn't know what you were doing necessarily, but now looking back, you did, and you're like, damn, if we were going to do that again, we would need to be good at it and know what we were doing.
Yeah.
So that's important for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, we got lucky on a lot of things, and hindsight's 2020, of course, but there's so much energy for that at that time. Like I just was so blessed that I had all the energy. Like I was putting so much care into it. It was so fun for me. Like I was so in love with the idea of it. That was part of the juice too, is, we'd sign every card with an order. We'd have like a little card in the order with, our signatures and just something special, all that little stuff that really helped build the community. Like that stuff matters, especially as you're starting, because we really were connecting with all of our customers at a deeper level and putting those like finishing touches. And then at a certain point, you can't stay stuck in that because you're not going to be able to scale, if you're doing handwritten notes to every order.
Right.
So you have to find your way through that too, and still keep it engaging, but keep planning ahead and what's the next thing and that you can do that's going to maintain what you've built, but allow you to go bigger.
Yeah. So I'm hearing so many ingredients that are necessary to have a successful clothing brand launched. You were clear on the background that you're coming from, the community you're supporting. You did have custom intentional design clothing. You were locking it in with a couple choice marketing campaigns, and you had like a core dedicated early adopters audience. And I know from our previous conversations there ended up being a little bit of burnout, a little bit of like, this isn't working with the three of you as a triad business owners anymore. And that was kind of the unwinding of it. And then you moved on. But I see that there's like a parallel universe where if you all did stick in there, you had the ingredients and maybe you could even still pick it up. Like now it's, if you had a $10,000 cash injection and you all decided to just totally revamp it, I feel like you could.
Yeah.
The clothing you have probably is good to go. You might not need to like really totally reinvent the wheel of what clothes you had, but now it would be like, let's re-educate the market that we're still here. What is the mission that we stand for? And then just like targeted marketing and make sure that your inventory and cash flow is intelligent. Like you're liquidating your cash well and not sitting on inventory. So like it could have worked, if it would have been, it looks like the next chapter would have been getting strategic on your business plays and like probably getting a mentor to be like, okay, you want to scale your clothing brand? Here is how Supreme did it at the stage that you are at now. Here's how Phil Knight, Nike did it with his shoes when he was just selling Onitsukas out of the back of his car. When he was at that step, here's what he had to do.
Yeah.
I'd buy a second pair of shorts, that's for sure.
I had a pair of shorts too.
I have a second pair. Like I have the MYRM shorts will never come back. I'm sorry to say, guys, because their manufacturer was gone a long time ago. But I do have a design for the MYRM Short 2.0 that I've been sitting on for years. I would be interested maybe in doing that. But ultimately, I'm not interested in making clothes because I don't think the world needs more clothes from me particularly anymore. At least not as like the main focus of a business. I think that's why I've kind of moved into merch. And like sometimes I just like a cute little something that feels good, or I like a box tee. It's very selfish. Like that's what's remained about that part of my, it's like I wanted to make clothes that I wanted to wear. Like, where's this shirt that looks like this and fits like this that It doesn't exist that I can't buy. I want to make that shirt so I can wear it. And I don't care if anyone else does. But I wouldn't want to reorient towards like building out a clothing business per se anymore, because to me, there's just so many bigger problems in the world to solve that are more enticing in terms of like, if I'm going to put my life towards something, I'm excited more about, really helping people, and most people don't need a new t-shirt. Like, no offense to like, this is
for your journey,
for my journey, this is
yourself.
this is very for me at this point, and I got everything I needed out of that part of it for all intents and purposes.
So transitioning away from MYRM, now we're into the next chapter for you, and you can fill in the blanks, but then Height Drop came along. So what was that? What is that? And you're transforming it right now. So tell us, tell our audience kind of where you're going with that.
So Height Drop started actually somewhat around the same time as the MYRM stuff. It was 2014 was when the first episode aired or was uploaded. And so it's now been around 10 years,
Congrats.
Which is crazy to think about. But it's something I'm proud I stuck with for sure, because it started as just us dicking around and recording our random thoughts and various, sidebar and tangential conversations that had nothing to do with parkour, but also we'd talk about the news in parkour every week, Dylan and I and Knox, and then eventually more guests and a lot of people in that Apex community back at that time. And even back then, I had sort of seeded it in my mind with an idea of like, well, what we need to do, what I'd like to see is have this. We need to get parkour conversations into people that aren't doing or caring about parkour. If we can start to penetrate the lexicon and the people's language and the way they think about things that way, by bringing cross-pollination of people outside of parkour industry within parkour and vice versa, that's where I see it going, is I guess what I should say. And so then it had various iterations where it kind of dropped off and I stopped doing it. And then I came back a few years ago and I decided I wanted to revamp it again. And it was at this time now, it was completely mine. Dylan had helped me with the first season, whatever, but then it very, very quickly became just me after that. And then I committed to it for a year where I was like, I'm doing an episode every week. I got through that, where I learned a lot about just volume and consistency, but then no real results in terms of growth after that year. I mean, there was some momentum building, but it wasn't a key factor. It was not realized. And we had talked about this in our episode of that show that we just did, which you can be focusing and you can be doing something really right, but you're still not investing your energy in the right area to get to your next stage. And so
that's a lot of wheel spinning.
And a lot of self-discovery. I think so what I talked about earlier, what I finally realized is like the way that I'm going to actually get the most out of this is if I reorient towards more service-oriented, community-serving conversations. At the same time, it's kind of like paradoxical. The only way I feel like I can do it right is to now not worry about what community it's serving, but just serve the broader community of humans.
Sure.
And also remove the sort of box of parkour. Even if, especially, right now, there's nothing different about it. I'm not really doing anything. I'm not still talking to parkour athletes, but rebranding it to the Brandon Andrew Douglas show just felt like a more truer, resonant thing to do, because that is what ultimately is the only through line with this channel, is me. And there's like a lot of parallels. Like one thing, it's just being a better listener than a speaker was part of this journey. Like I think when I first started Height Drop, it was all about sharing my opinions. And then I realized that I didn't really have as much to say as I thought I did. So then I went into a lot more of a listening mode and trying to actually have insights to offer people, or at least develop them, and understand when they actually were fully formed, rather than just spilling it out, unsolicited, and thinking I was a lot cuter than I probably was. That was a limiting factor. It's like, am I really that cute and fun that people really want to pay attention to me? It's like, well, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe, you just need to be more entertaining. It's like, that's why I've always admired stand-up comedians, is if the people are laughing and you can build an audience, like, great, there's evidence. And you are doing a service that way.
Yeah.
But if your material isn't working, then maybe you need to rework the material, rework your approach. And so, what were you going to say, Chris?
I was just going to say, I like that, what you were saying about the box that Parkour kind of had put the show in, because looking at recent episodes of the B.A.D show, you know, it encompasses a lot more of what you're saying, which is like, you know, basically any conversation can be touched on. It's not in the frame or lens necessarily of like through just parkour. It allows more of life to be captured, you know, and that through line you're talking about where you're like, well, the only consistency is me. I think that's really important to zoom in on as well, because people's stories and people's experiences exist and live inside of a listening, you know, and so that's actually like one of the most important things that you can provide as an entertainer is like a space for people's stories and experiences to exist, you know. So yeah, I just want to comment on that. I think that's really great what you're saying.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm hearing in your journey, even starting with MYRM and up through to now, that you have really, really explored the impact of a personal brand. So with MYRM, that was, you know, paired with Dylan Baker and Knox as well. Your guys, all three of your personal brands contributed so well to why people would buy it and just their awareness of it at all. And you carrying that through into High Drop and building those relationships, and you know, every episode where it does deviate from parkour, now you're talking about MMA, you're talking about health, you're talking about even just down to like little niche places in Colorado that you're familiar with, like the Brandon really comes out and the audience really gets to know the Brandon as opposed to the athlete and just the athlete. And so I think now that you're leaving just the box of parkour and you're opening up access that people have to you, in that you like MMA, that you know, do like really care about all these different facets. Now your audience can really see themselves in you, because most of the audience just isn't a super high level athlete, you know? So now they can say like, oh wow, you're interested in that and so am I. And that personal brand is really just, that gives you access to building such a bigger audience with this new version of your podcast, The B.A.D Show, than the previous one that kind of had like a much smaller box to it. And that's all your personal brand building.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I like the way you put that. It's yeah, I think like people are the hyper objects, you know. Ultimately, I am, and you guys are the most interesting, complex level of organism that exists, you know, maybe except the Earth, the total, or, you know, or whatever that we could like look at right now. But we are the Earth, you know, that's my sort of understanding of it. You know, where do we come from? You know, we're all born using material from the earth,
if
and
an
it goes
apple
back
tree
the other
apples
way.
and earth peoples, you know,
Or an earth peoples, exactly. And so, but anyhow, like, so yeah, I love that you're putting it that way, and I love that it can be open up, and it's sort of an embrace of my own maturation, like you're saying, and just realizing, you know, I have multiple interests too, and I'm a hyper object just like any of the people. And that's one of the things I loved about from the beginning of and all the way through High Drop is the episode titles are the people that are on them, because that is what is the most interesting thing to me, is these people, you know, these are the people, Jimmy Davidson, Christopher Hollingsworth, like those. And that's what, you know, I'm going to be looking for when I see a guest on a podcast that I really enjoy. It's like, I just like that person. I like that person's angle, that point of view, that energy, whatever I'm gaining off of them. Like they're a mentor for me in as long as I'm listening to them, probably. And then maybe I'll move on to the next one. Maybe I'll keep touching base with them years and years into the future. But it's a nice reminder to know that like these are the things that are the most interesting, and the human is at the center of all that we're doing, because like, you know, topics come and go, trends come and go, and you know, we're going to answer some of those questions, and they're also never going to get answered, some of these questions. And so that's not what's important to me. But when people see Christopher Hollingsworth in the title, they know, oh, I got to catch up with Christopher. Yeah. Because that's why I'm coming from, you know, that's what I think people really benefit from. When I listen back, when I'm cutting through to get the clips, I'm like, man, this is so cool that, you know, we just get to spend an hour with Christopher, an hour with Dante, or an hour with Jimmy, or 2 hours or whatever. makes me feel like I'm really there with them.
That's how I feel too anytime I'm on your show as well. You know, like I did your show almost a decade ago as well, as like a young 20 something. And it's interesting being in my 30s and going back and like listening to myself almost 10 years in the past and like my mindset then and what I was thinking. It's like a little snapshot, just a human connection and conversation snapshot. And it's really cool too. I know that you're moving out of the parkour box, but just being someone that's so passionate about parkour and being able to see like all of the different snapshot conversations that you've had over the years with people is such a unique archive that doesn't exist anywhere else in the way that you have created it, you know. And so for someone like me who's like a parkour history buff, a freak, you know, like that kind of stuff is really cool for me to be able to go back and like look at people's mindsets and pair that with what they've accomplished in the parkour scene and, you know, like kind of just make my own assumptions based off of that. You know, it's cool. It gives my life direction and like a lot of just a lot of epiphanies and insights, you know. So yeah, it's cool to see.
That means so much to me. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, of course.
So as we wrap up, what do you think your message would be to a parkour entrepreneur who's listening right now?
My message to the parkour entrepreneurs out there.
What's your wisdom nugget? Your hot take,
wisdom
if you
nugget,
will.
my hot take is that you are an entrepreneur and you don't need to qualify as a parkour entrepreneur per se. I don't know that that's actually a helpful distinction for most people. It's not that it's not, but it can actually, again, put you in a box. And maybe that's where I'm at. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And hopefully that helps you sort of expand and realize that parkour is interwoven with every single other thing in life at some level. And so you don't necessarily need to think of yourself as a parkour entrepreneur or an entrepreneur. Like there's the idea of entrepreneurship and then there's the idea of a parkour thing. And yes, there's a place where they overlap, but the skills are very different. So develop any entrepreneurial skill is going to apply not just to parkour, it's going to apply to all enterprise.
Yeah, and finding a lot of those skills, you might have to totally leave the parkour nest, you know, and developing yourself even spiritually. A lot of times you just totally need to leave the realm of your local community, your training partners, the parkour as a concept. You know, you have to go climb a different hill and get some different skills and come back.
Yeah. I've definitely had that be a part of my journey, is like sort of taking a big step back. And that step back is actually what gave me the awareness and the perspective to actually see how I was doing it wrong and why it doesn't, these things are precious to us. But if you want to be able to communicate what's precious about them to other people, you have to understand like where they're coming from and why they don't think it's so precious, which you can't do if you're completely absorbed in it sometimes. So like, I get why people aren't as into parkour as I am. And that actually helps me make parkour more exciting, that knowing what people don't love about it. But if I am convinced that parkour is exciting and it's the only truth, then, that can be a limiting device in your mind.
Yeah. It closes too many doors.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, any last things, Christopher, you want to ask?
No, I think that's it. Just one circling back. Actually, yes, one last thing. now that I think about it, just circling back to one thing that Brandon said earlier in the conversation that I think is really key, and just also kind of tying up what you just said, Brandon, which was really fantastic about like venturing out and learning different skills. You had mentioned that a skill that was really critical for you during the time that you were running your clothing company was, not taking things too personally and recognizing like, wow, fairness doesn't exist as much as I thought it did, at least in the professional sphere of things. And everyone kind of has to adopt a culture of carrying the weight. And it can't just be like one person, even if on paper, like I'm the one that's supposed to be carrying the boat 85% of the time, like you can't resent me if you're going to also carry it 15% of the time, Mm-hmm. And so I think that skill of not taking things personally is like just really valuable. And I appreciate you just reframing that and bringing that back into the picture. It's a good reminder for me as well, because as a high performer, like it's easy for me to say, man, other people aren't performing like I am, or, and so it's just a really great reminder that no matter where you are, just don't take things personally. And so I just really appreciate you bringing that into perspective. And that's one of those skills you have to leave the parkour sphere to gain. I feel like that not taking things personally, and that culture of everybody has to kind of pitch in is not something that like you really get in parkour too often. So I appreciate you just like bringing that to the conversation. That was great.
Thanks, brother.
Yeah.
I want to add one last thing, because I like to do I love paradox right now. I love how you have to hold, like in my world, what I've learned is you have to hold all of it. That's the only way you can actually function. And even though everything is kind of bipolar and there is polarity, there's always a third way to kind of like hold both ends of the pole from a different perspective that actually sort of makes those poles obsolete in a way. Like they can be I hope I'm making sense, but basically they're not something you need to be upset anymore about. They're just tools to use, like either end of the pole.
Right.
And so in that spirit, I want to just kind of speak back to the parkour entrepreneurs out there and go against what I said. If you are a parkour entrepreneur and you are like, I identify as parkour entrepreneur, then I think if you're that person, probably you're super passionate about parkour. And I want you to know that what you're doing absolutely matters no matter what level of success, in big quotes, you reach. There is something that is, I think, part of it's a fallacy of our, all of our societal conditioning is, there's a difference between what success we all think it looks like and what it can actually feel like. And it doesn't look the same for everybody, but I just think it's important, I guess, to say right now, for whatever reason, like if your brand or your company doesn't have the success that you think it did or will, it will have, like, whatever success it has is super meaningful and super powerful if you're just connecting with a few dozen people even, or just one person. Like, I guess that's, it's a time old message, but I really think it's important driving home that if you have a dream and you get it out into the world, you won't even necessarily know how powerful it is until you're, at least for me, that was my experience. I didn't know how much I was going to actually give to the community until it was over. Because I wasn't necessarily focused on it giving. And so that's one of the reasons why it went over. But it was still, even though if it was selfish for me, it was still giving to the community in a big way. And so I just want to encourage people to move on whatever idea they have, whatever it is, get to the end of that, like get complete with that energy.
I think that's a really good encouragement too, because a lot of what stops people is like this fear of being selfish, like acting on a selfish desire, like, oh, I can't have $1 million. That's fucking selfish. It's capitalist of me. How capitalist of me. Or I can't have my business succeed. That would be, really selfish. I should just get the money that I need, not what I want. And that is super limiting, because you achieving your dreams and you putting that out there like has so much more of an impact than you think on other people. And so that's just a really great reminder to people, like, don't dim your light, like put it out there and fucking go for it. Like big time. You have no idea the difference it can make in other people's lives. So yeah, thanks for sharing that, Brandon. That's a really great way to send it off to all the parkour entrepreneurs out there.
Yeah, and of course, parkour entrepreneurs listening, if you go to motionmentors.org, you can check out our blog. We have free resources. We are trying to give away pretty much everything we've ever learned about entrepreneurialism for free, so that you guys can have access, so that when you're in that position where you're giving your full heart and you think you've reached your wall, that's when you should seek some outside knowledge, leave parkour, the knowledge industry of it, and seek the wisdom of the world, and we've tried to compile as much as we can on motionmentors.org to help you entrepreneurs. So check that out. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Brandon, really appreciate your time and for sharing your wisdom. So thanks a lot, man.
Yeah,
appreciate
thanks,
it.
Brandon.
Thank you guys. You guys are the bee's knees, as they say. Absolutely. I love what you guys are doing. So many people are going to find so much greater success in this industry because of what you're offering.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you for saying that. We appreciate it. Awesome. All right. Take care, y'all.